Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Need training? Visit the Vendor Process Training Center to enroll in your choice of weekly live and on-demand training sessions. Plus, get access to vendor setup form templates and reference tools that will help you and your team avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. So sign up for a free account to get access to free training sessions, vendor process FAQs, and a resource library with information you need to manage your vendor master file. Visit training.debrarrichardson.com today. The link will be in the show notes. So is your vendor master file and customer master file the same? Don't miss taking advantage of these key benefits when they are one in the same. So, what are those benefits? Keep listening. Welcome to episode 338. 3 benefits when the customer master file is also the vendor master file. Now, I know some of you are going, hey, wait, she is the, AP person for vendor setup and maintenance. And so I've always talked about the vendor master file. As a matter of fact, the part of the explanation or description for this podcast in general is, right, protecting the vendor master file from fraud. But I was asked, right, earlier this year, if any of what I talk about can apply to the customer master file. And then I thought, well, of course it can, because it's still a master file of data that is used for certain business transactions. Instead of, right, processing invoices based on the information in the vendor master file, that AP, right, is on the AP side. For the customer master file, that data is used to generate invoices, right, on the accounts receivable side. Now, on the vendor master file side, I have a framework called Authentication Validation Management, and that really is a 3-step process to set up the vendor, or 3-step vendor setup and maintenance process, say it that way, that really is set up to avoid fraud, fines, and bad vendor data. And it's a framework that includes 5 authentication techniques, 29 internal controls, 17 best practices, and 18 vendor validations. And I actually update that every year because, right, fraudsters are always evolving. The IRS and, regulatory agencies are always evolving. And so when I looked at that, for the customer master file, you know what? I could apply a lot of the same of the framework towards the customer. And so I've actually done just that, and I'll talk about launching that training session. But I first wanted to talk about, which I thought that's a great benefit, right, of um, uh, now applying that same framework to the customer master file, especially when the customer master file is the same as the vendor master file. And I will tell you, it depends on your accounting system or ERP. And when I was still a practitioner, and for those of you that don't know, I used to be an accounts payable senior manager. I was over a team of 17. All we did was vendor setup and maintenance requests, and maintain the vendor master file, send out 1099s, 1042 S's, right, to our vendors. And we maintained 140,000 vendors across 7 different ERPs. Now, 2 of those ERPs were 2 different instances of SAP. And if anyone knows anything about SAP, there is an option, or SAP has an option to combine the customer master file and the vendor master file. And I was actually on the project team uh, to have, I think they called it one ERP or something, because we had so many ERPs. And so we were trying to get down to one. I don't know if they ever got to it. I left before the project really got underway because it kept having so many delays. But I was part of that project team. And early on, the question was, were we going to combine the customer master file and the vendor master file? And at the time, I think I was absolutely against it, because the uh, certain information on the file was shared between the customer and the vendor side, and in certain cases, right, it wasn't going to be the same. And a great example was the bank account information. Now, for those of you that are knee deep in SAP, let me just say that at the time we were using ECC 6.0 or ECC 6, and we were looking at using SAP, or upgrading the SAP S4 HANA. And so we were looking at, right, combining both. But looking at the banking details, the problem that I saw is that the vendor master file, or the banking details that we collected for the vendor payments, was a shared field with the customer, or a shared screen with the customer master file. And I did not want the folks on the customer side, because they were different, to have access to sensitive banking information, right? The less people that have access to that data, the better. And so it might have been different if there were a different circumstance. But we'll talk about that in a moment. But my vote for that was not to combine them. But I know there are some of you out there that have SAP that have combined the customer master file and the vendor master file into one. And you may even have a different accounting system or ERP. I do not claim to know them all. As I've been working with clients, there are so many out there that I never even heard of, that are industry specific, that are homegrown. Yes, they are still out there. But so that was my take on it. But I will tell you, if you do have the same opportunity that I had to combine them, here are some advantages or some benefits that you can take advantage of when that happens. So if it's possible, it might be something that you want to look at doing for these 3 benefits. So let's talk about those 3. And so again, some accounting systems or ERPs have the functionality to use the same record as both the customer master file and the vendor master file. And in using the same record for customers and vendors, you have, again, these 3 benefits. So the first one is it resolves any segregation of duties issues, because you're designating a separate team to consolidate the management of master file data, which eliminates the need for compensatory controls when a team member has access to a process or data that causes a segregation of duties issues. So on the AR side, if you have a team member that has responsibility for cash application and for customer master file management, that causes a segregation of duties issue. Or on the AP side, if you have a team member that is entering in invoices and also, right, adding or updating vendors, that causes a segregation of duties issues. And I know that a lot of companies out there, maybe even some government state, local, city, right? Finance departments have those issues, but they do have, or they should have compensating controls in place. But if you have a whole separate team that is responsible for the management of what now is the master file data, then now you don't have to have someone, separate team members doing multiple tasks that causes that segregation of duties issue because you've taken the vendor master file responsibilities and the customer master file responsibilities from those AR and AP team members, or AP and AR team members, if I say it in the right order. And you've put that to a separate team. So by designating that separate team, you have eliminated some segregation of duties issues that you may have in your finance operations or AP or AR departments. So that is one. And actually, I did like when I was talking about the SAP and combining the vendor master file, or using the same record for the vendor master file and the customer master file, kind of combining those. If there was going to be a separate data management team, or whatever you want to call it, that handles both, that actually would have been good. I wouldn't have had an issue with that, but that's not what we were setting up. So again, I said no, but I don't know what they eventually did. And I don't know if there was anything that they could have said long term that would have changed it. But again, I left before that project really got underway because it kept being a lot of delays. All right, so that's one of the three. The second of the three is that now you can identify customers that are vendors. So, knowing when customers are also vendors can help when collecting from your customer. And why is that? So, if a customer, right, has not paid a balance, knowing that your company also has outstanding invoices to be paid will allow your organization to apply invoices owed towards a balance due. And I will tell you that is not something that we ever looked at when I was that AP senior manager over global vendor setup and maintenance. We were actually too busy just dealing with vendor requests and maintaining the vendor master file. And so we never looked to see if the vendors were also customers. And that might have also helped with some of the cleanup of the vendor master file too, because the customer master file may have had updated information, or vice versa. Maybe the AR team, right, could have used some of our information to clean up some of their customer information. And that is not always 100% true, because sometimes that information does need to be different. But still, you can take advantage when the customer has a balance due to you, when you also have a balance due to your customer. All right. The third of the three is that, and it's kind of along the same lines, but it reduces the potential for bad debt. So, recognizing that customers are also vendors of the same organization tend to result in paying those organizations first so that you maintain a positive relationship. Now, I will also say this was, and I'm not going to put it down as a benefit, but speaking of that positive relationship, this was, I don't know, probably about 4 years ago, and I was at a conference, and one company was speaking about their experience with implementing a vendor self registration portal. And as anyone that has implemented those portals where vendors have to log in, and it doesn't even have to be a vendor registration portal, it could be any, an invoicing portal. You know that sometimes, right, you have vendors that are just not going to register, particularly though with the vendor self-registration portal, because that is a little more involved with registration and maintaining that information. Anyway, she was was talking about how the customer or the vendor would not register in the portal, right? The adoption was zero for that vendor. They refused to do it. But she turned around and what she did was looked on the customer side. She saw that the vendor was also a customer of theirs. And guess what? That customer also had a vendor self registration portal that they needed to register in and that they had registered in. So when she brought that up, you got it. The customer went ahead, or the vendor went ahead and registered in the portal. So again, right, you have you can take advantage of them trying to maintain that positive that tries to be maintained by both sides when a customer is also a vendor. All right. So those are the three. One is the fact that you have a separate team to consolidate the management of the vendor master file data, resolve some segregation of duties issues. The second one is it identifies customers that are vendors so that you can leverage that when an amount is owed to you that is not paid. And again, you can leverage that by offsetting what is due to your company with what is due to your customer. And the last one is, right, reducing the potential for bad debt because your customer wants to maintain a positive relationship with you. And maintaining that positive relationship can have some other advantages as well, especially when you are implementing tools that can make your processes more efficient to get them to make sure that they adopt it. All right. Now, on that note, I talked about, right, the authentication validation management and how it's a framework for the vendor master or a vendor setup and maintenance process. It has the 5 authentication techniques, 29 internal controls, 17 best practices, and 18 vendor validations. Now, I started talking about earlier when I looked at that framework to see what could be applied to the customer master file? Because a lot of it is based on, right, data, and you want to make sure that data is valid. You want to make sure that you collect it securely and that fraud doesn't get introduced. And you also want to make sure that the customer is real, just like, right, your vendors are, and that you are not dealing with customers that you shouldn't be dealing with. And so, what I came up with within that authentication validation management framework is 5 authentication techniques, 23 internal controls, 12 best practices, and 13 customer validations. And what I did is I put that together in a 3-hour workshop. And so it is now available in what I would say a beta form because I know that there may be some updates to it. I would love to hear feedback from those that take the training session. And so I'm going to offer it at 50% off for the first month to start off with. And so today, when this episode is published, is May 15th, Thursday, May 15th. This podcast always publishes on a Thursday. And so through June 15th, I'm going to have that as half off. And I would love to hear your feedback if you have any related to that training session or that workshop. So those of you that have both AR and AP, and I know there are a lot of you out there, right? You might want to bring over your AR folks or your master data management team to take advantage of the discount while it lasts. So I am going to link to the 3-step customer setup and maintenance process workshop and it will already have the 50% off discount applied. And then you can let me know, or your team members or whoever takes it can let me know if there need to be any changes. Again, I focus on the vendor master file, but there are so many of the elements of the authentication validation management framework that also apply to the customer master file. So make sure you take advantage of that if you are interested. All right, so thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 338th episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.